Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. We're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me here on the screen, my co-host, as always, Joe Clark. Joe, a little less fun writing after a Steelers loss, especially when it comes to to the 2-8 Cleveland Browns. That is especially a bad time. But how's it been for you the last few days?
Yeah, we should have. I guess we should have seen the Browns loss coming. The weather definitely played more of a factor than I think we probably anticipated, even knowing it would be a snow game. But tough one. Big opportunity to bounce back against the Bengals on Sunday.
Yeah, you see those stats that get thrown around, like Steelers have lost X amount of divisional road games on Thursday in a row, and I don't like those kinds of stats are fun to talk about and write about, but I never really hold too much weight in them. Perhaps I should hold a little more weight in them because I was proven wrong here. I thought this was going to be a nice, easy win for the Steelers. Of course, maybe that's foolish on my part because it is a divisional game, but man, the Browns, just haven't really looked good other than their win against the Ravens and their win against the Steelers. So Steelers got a little bit of that Ravens medicine as well. And of course, the Ravens are now just a half game back after beating the Chargers, Steelers losing. So I think what the Baltimore bye week is not this week, but the next. They play the Eagles this week, which will be a big one. If the Steelers lose and the Ravens win, then the Pittsburgh's going to find themselves not in control of the AFC North any longer. And of course, what are we? 1 week now from today or from tomorrow from Hard Knocks starting. So a lot of fun things around the corner. A lot of good games coming up for the Steelers. This week, the Bengals, which we will dive into a little later. First, we're going to talk about George Pickens, who's kind of been the topic of conversation once again. He finds himself in the media kind of news cycle more often, probably a little too often. And then the Steelers recapping that Browns loss and just some of our thoughts there, putting a bow on that before we preview the Bengals. That's going to be the show today. And so we'll hop in and talk about George Pickens. Where to start? I mean, it wasn't a great performance by him. He did have the one nice deep catch, and I thought he probably had a couple of opportunities there. There was that one that Russell Wilson missed in the end zone. I don't know if it was a miss or if Pickens just, maybe didn't run the route correctly or whatever it was, but pretty wide open in the end zone, and the ball just was, 4 feet to the left of him or whatever it was. So could have had a better game, but wasn't the best game for Pickens. What was his actual box score? Because this is important. These things only really happen when Pickens has a bad game and the Steelers lose. 4 receptions for 48 yards. He had 7 targets. So 31 of those 48 yards came on one catch. So he more or less did not much the rest of the game. And of course, the Hail Mary, the final Hail Mary, he ended up in a fight in the back of the end zone rather than trying to catch the ball. Joe, I'll let you take it away here and just give you some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, he just at the end of the play kind of got boxed out by Greg Newsome. I think you'd probably like to see him make a little bit more of an effort to get through, but I think Newsome also deserves a lot of credit for making a good play on Pickens, kind of knowing he was going to be the guy that they went to in that situation. Hit him out of bounds, meaning if Pickens re-entered, the first guy to touch the ball would have been illegal touching. So I don't really have like people have been saying that Pickens quit on the play. That he, I mean, Rodney McLeod said that Pickens had no intention of catching the ball. I don't really think that's necessarily the case. I think Newsome just kind of made a nice play. Pickens wasn't, positioned great. And Newsome kind of had an easier box out than he should have. But we just can't keep doing this with George Pickens. Every time they lose, that he's the talking point for the next, week plus after the game. It happened against the Cowboys. It happened again now. So now their last 2 losses. Even the Colts game, he had that fumble. Was kind of discussed a little bit, and I think he had some issues on the sidelines in that game too. And it's not even like, if he has a bad game, like 4 for 48 and the weather's not terrible against the Colts earlier this year, he had a good game. I mean, I believe him when he says he just really hates losing, and it's not something that he's used to from his time at Georgia, and that it grates him. But he's got to grow up, and he's got to just be. He can't take losing so hard. Which, hey, you like a guy that wants to take a loss on the chin, but you have to be mature about it. You have to move on to the next one, and he just hasn't shown the maturity to move on from a loss up to this point. Through 2 seasons or 3 seasons in his career, but really the last 2 seasons have been the ones where the attitude issues have really been highlighted. There's a few flare ups his rookie year. I mean, I remember the one against the Falcons, but last years have kind of been the bigger ones. It just can't keep happening. He's got to be a guy that grows up a little bit because he's just getting so much negative attention. I mean, the Browns have been chirping him all week, and rightfully so. I mean, they played good defense against him, got in his head, and had him, go after their dude at the end of the game. So chirp away. And it's just something that can't affect him. We Bengals this weekend, Browns next weekend. If Pickens is in his own head and the Browns are in his head, then advantage Cleveland there. So just one of those things that I'm just sick of just talking about George Pickens all the time after a loss because he does something, a little boneheaded, a little stupid that he just shouldn't be doing at this point in his career. So, really, really just need to see some maturity out of him.
Yeah, and Mike Tomlin made some interesting comments about this today, about that specific play, kind of not absolving Pickens, but he was a little bit more favorable to Pickens, saying that, he kind of felt like Pickens was being interfered with down the field. And, what you want to see from Pickens is, instead of just kind of letting himself be run out of bounds, make a play back to the ball. And if Newsome's going to run you over, which it seemed like he was basically doing, then let him run you over and make it so obvious that a flag has to be thrown. That's the best you can do there. I know the refs tend to not really call stuff in those Hail Mary plays unless it's like overwhelmingly obvious. And I think Pickens had an opportunity to make something happen that maybe could have been overwhelmingly obvious if he, tried to make a move back, because Newsome was essentially running him out of bounds, and Pickens just kind of let it happen and then got frustrated by it. And of course, now we're talking about probably a fine. Mary Kay Cabot of Cleveland.com said that the NFL is reviewing that. Obviously, this is now a repeat offense situation, which means escalating punishments. I know the NFL sent out some memos at the beginning of the year. This was about player safety issues, so it's not the exact same thing, but just lets you know some insight into their decision making and kind of how they're no nonsense with this kind of stuff. The player safety stuff, at least, they were like, hey, and if you're a repeat offender and you do it again, you're going to get a suspension. And so Cabot made sure to clarify there's no suspension likely coming for Pickens, which is good because that would be ridiculous. But he is likely to get a big fine. I think what was the last fine for this? It was like $10,000 or some little over $10,000, I believe, on that fine for ripping Jordan Lewis down in the Cowboys game. The escalating nature of this, he can expect quite a bit more on this second one. And now that he has that label as a repeat offender, I mean, if this happens 2 more times next season, or, one more time this season, one more time next season, if this happens 2 or 3 more times over the course of the next year or two, while he's in Pittsburgh, could it eventually result in a suspension? I don't know. But if they just he can't keep testing that, is I guess what I'm trying to get at. So yeah, it is frustrating. And I think the rising tensions were kind of happening throughout the game. There was who was it that was saying he tripped him?
Grant Delpit.
Yeah. Safety Grant Delpit was saying, Pickett, tripped him, and reviewing the tape, he did. I mean, it pretty much looked like he did indeed do that. And then they, of course, retaliated and snatched his mouth guard out at some point. And so, a little bit of back and forth, rising tensions throughout the game. And so I think the Hail Mary and him kind of feeling like he was getting interfered with down the field was probably the final straw. And of course, the Steelers were pretty much in a lose situation, which perfect situation, perfect storm for a Pickens freak out. So, yeah, I don't know if there's much more to be said about that other than, you just hope he learns from this once again. I keep reminding everybody in all the posts that I write about this, he is 23 years old. He's younger than Troy Fautanu. He's younger than Peyton Wilson. He's younger than pretty much almost every rookie on the team, save a couple. And so we're talking about a very young player. However, the Steelers need to make a decision this upcoming offseason, more or less, if they're going to keep him. They typically extend those players a year before they are due to hit free agency. Now, Joe, do you think they do that, or do you think they're in a position where they're going to be forced to wait and see and then maybe flirt with using the franchise tag in 2025 or next offseason if it becomes necessary? Where do you think they are? Do you think they can comfortably extend him right now?
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for him to wait and see. I think he's kind of going to be expected an extension. he doesn't get when there's going to be tensions. I think you kind of want to avoid as much tension as possible. I mean, he's still one of the top receivers in the league in receiving yardage totals. I think if anything, if things boil over, it could be a situation where, maybe his name's already been floated in some trade scenarios by Diana Rossini this year, which wasn't really sure where those came from, but he was floated out there as one of her potential trade candidates. Obviously, were never going to happen, and the Steelers played really well, and so Pickens didn't end up going anywhere. I think them trading him this offseason is probably more likely than them kicking the can down the road on an extension. Just because I just think if they do try to do that, it's gonna cause issues. So I think it'll be really interesting to see where things go because I don't know how committed they're gonna be to paying him top dollar, especially coming off what should probably end up being the best season of his career. And you pay him top dollar in an exploding receiving market, that is a lot of money for a guy that has been a little bit more of a headache than the money will probably be worth. So it could be a very interesting offseason with how the Steelers handle Pickens.
Yeah, until you said that, I don't know if I fully understood. He's sixth in receiving yards right now, which, I mean, I wouldn't have probably expected that, or I didn't expect that. I don't. He's been near the top for a while there, but it's kind of been a little slower. So I thought maybe he would have fallen back, but he's 776. He's just behind Zay Flowers. So he's, flirting with being a top 5 receiver right now. Of course, the big missing piece of that equation is the fact that he only has 2 touchdowns. He's the only guy in the top, let's see, you have to go way down the list to find someone else who has less touchdowns than him. I think that would be, this isn't even a receiver, but Trey McBride is 19th in receiving yards overall and has 0 touchdowns. The next receiver, Jerry Jeudy, as a matter of fact, down on the list at number 22, who has 2 touchdowns. So all that to say, yeah, I don't know how they're going to approach that situation. It's going to be very, very interesting with Pickens. But I want to move on to our next segment here, talking about the Browns and the Steelers, just recapping that game, putting a bow on it. I think it's been pretty well talked about, now that we're however many days out from that. Well, 5 days now, I think. And so I wanted to hit on some of the more controversial topics from the game and just get your takes on this, Joe. But before that, I did want to talk briefly about Myles Garrett and TJ Watt. Myles Garrett basically rubbing it in after the game. He had 3 sacks. He had a forced fumble. He looked like the better player. I'm going to be honest. I don't think he is the better player personally. But he looked like the better player on this game, on this day, and he took full advantage of that by saying after the game that, nobody gets schemed around like me. I am the defensive player of the year conversation starts and ends with me. Joe, your reaction to that?
He's got the right to say it after they played on Thursday. Do I agree with it? No, I think Watt's been the better player over the last few years, but he completely outplayed Watt on Thursday and his team got the win. So I don't really have an issue with him saying it at all. I do think Watt's better. I think Watt, has kind of heard the course of people talking this week about what Garrett did and how he basically didn't show up. He had a pretty bad game. And I think he's going to kind of rebound, and he's hearing that and feeding off that. And Sunday could be ugly for Cincinnati with TJ Watt getting going, and he's had a lot of success against Joe Burrow and the Bengals in the past. But Garrett has every right to kind of talk his talk after 3 first half sacks, completely just dominated the Pittsburgh front, and Watt did absolutely nothing. So fine, I have no problem with what Garrett said, even though if you look at the numbers from their entire career, it's not true. But given the way he outperformed them in the one-on-one setting, which Watt has done a million times in the past, but on Thursday, Garrett did it and his team won. So I think talk. It's fine.
Yeah, I agree, but it is worth noting TJ Watt, this was only his 3rd time in now 14 career games, including the postseason, that he's failed to register a sack against the Browns. He's had 4 multi-sack games, including a 3-sack game in 2018 and a 4-sack game in 2022. 17 sacks now across 14 games. And I think if you stack those numbers against Myles Garrett in those same games, Watt has clearly outperformed him. So it's, I agree. Garrett's allowed to talk his talk after a performance like that. But, you can't just completely ignore the fact that Watt has done that before and more. So, What? Who reported today that Garrett was very upset about the
That
the?
was Cabot. That was Mary Kay Cabot
Okay,
that
Cabot was
the
stoking the
Watt brothers'
yeah.
actions on Twitter during the NFL honors last year that took away from his moment, and he was very, very upset about that. And he held that with him and used that to motivate his performance, which like the tweets were very innocuous, and the numbers said that T.J. Watt was the better player. He's allowed to be disappointed, and also didn't diminish Garrett in what he was saying. So,
Right.
um, but I mean, edge rushers, I mean, I guess NFL players in general use any perceived slight as fuel. And in that case, Garrett used what the Watt brothers said, and hey, he got it. In the first game against TJ, he got his revenge. I'm probably not going to keep up, but um, that was the case on Thursday, and it hurt Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I think we're all the winners for this situation because I think TJ Watt and probably Myles Garrett are going to come out heated in a week, like a little over a week and a half from now when they
Yeah,
play
week
again.
14.
And they're going to be playing in Pittsburgh this time. TJ Watt's going to have the crowd on his side, and he's going to be amped up, no doubt, trying to respond because he needs a response here. Garrett pulled, I think, into second place in the league-wide sack race. Watt's kind of lagging behind now. He's looking for that response, and I think he could find one, so we'll see. But moving on to other topics from this game. Where do we want to start? Let's start with Justin Fields and his usage. He got seven snaps. He was on the field for 8 snaps, but there was a false start. So he only actually got 7 snaps. He had the 130-yard run, but other than that, it was 2 incomplete passes, one of which was bailed out by a roughing the passer. And then I think he had 2 runs of loss of 2 or loss of 3. And so he netted out to, that 30-yard run was impressive. But, Joe, is it worth him getting 7 or 8 snaps if he's only getting the one big play and otherwise several negative plays for the team?
I think if that becomes a trend, then no. But I don't think it will become a trend. I think, just the way the game went, Pittsburgh was kind of just a mess in short yardage situations all game. I don't think things would have been a lot better if Russell Wilson was handing that ball off in those situations. The offensive line didn't do a great job blocking. The one thing I didn't really love was him throwing late in the fourth quarter on the throw to Pickens, but I think I have more of an issue with the scheme on that play being really your only options are a deep ball down the sideline. I like Fields, having the ability to throw or pass because obviously he's a huge threat with his legs. That's where he'll get most of his usage, but you can't be one dimensional with it. And so I like having him out there and, the threat that he can pass, but I would have liked to see something maybe schemed up over the middle or something so it's not really an all or nothing ball to one of your receivers down the sidelines. And I think you could argue that there's pass interference on that play, but late in the game, it's one of those calls the officials aren't going to love to make. It's a play that can really change the tide, turn the tide of the game. So throwing and kind of hoping for the roughing the passer isn't the way to go. And I think if you're going to throw the ball deep down the sideline on was it 3rd and 4 late in the game, I think you'd rather probably have Russell Wilson and his moon ball in the game. Even though he wasn't great, Wilson wasn't great on Sunday, I still think you'd probably rather have him in if your intent there is to throw. While I do like the option for Fields to throw, that maybe wasn't the situation for him to break it out. So that's really where my gripe comes with it. I think you kind of have to see against the Bengals how he kind of does, and if he continues to struggle to consistently pick up yardage, then maybe you kind of rethink things a little bit. But I don't really have an issue with the amount of snaps he's getting per game. I just think you need to hope that things kind of eventually turn around in terms of them picking up more consistent yardage the way they did against the Ravens.
Yeah, I thought Russell Wilson, I mean, other than the fumble that he let up, which, Dan Moore Jr. gets dinged for allowing a sack there. But I mean, it really wasn't his fault. Yeah, he allowed Garrett to touch Wilson, but it was like the lightest touch that forced that fumble. He needs to secure that ball better. And Wilson had nothing but room. If he managed to, basically not fumble there, he could break out of the pocket to his left. He could either set his feet and look for something downfield, or he could even scramble, and it looked like he had, 6, 7, 8 yards to work with there. There was nobody in the area really. So, but I think other than that, Russell Wilson actually had one of his. It's hard to say one of his better games because the Steelers lost and. He only had 1 touchdown. He took 4 sacks, but I do think it was pretty efficient overall. 21 for 28, 270 yards. His touchdown to Calvin Austin was money, especially given the fact that he had pressure in his face. He took a huge hit. He took multiple big hits and just kept getting up and kept getting after it. And, he was playing his best football there in the second half. So I absolutely hated the fact that they had Fields in there doing that on the most crucial 2 plays of Steelers offense in that whole game. They had Fields, he did a handoff and then he had a throw, and just neither really did much of anything. And yeah, that was probably my biggest issue of the whole game, but there were other issues as well, specifically early in the game. The Steelers didn't really play their brand of football. I mean, we talk about the Falcons game in week 1. They were very conservative. Yes, that was with Justin Fields, but they were content with essentially letting their defense keep the score low, not beating themselves, not throwing the picks, not doing the crucial mistakes, and just kind of winning the field position battle and kind of winning that type of game. And what did they do in this game? The first drive, a 58-yard field goal that misses in the snow. Second drive, they go for it on 4th down on the Browns' 38, I think it was. Maybe that one I'm a little less upset about. The 38 is kind of no man's land, but they fail. It was a bad play. Justin Fields' run. They give the Browns the ball back on the 40. Yes, the Steelers' defense caused 3 and outs after both of those 2 drives, but they could have been winning the field position battle. The Browns punted from, the midfield mark instead of punting way back in their own end. The Steelers could have gotten the ball back at the 50, started those drives, and, at least gotten some field goals out of it. And given how, the game was a 1-possession game, that could have ended up making the difference. Joe, do you think the Steelers made a mistake by being aggressive against a perceived, lesser opponent? They could have just played it safe.
I think with the field goal, the opening drive, I think with how muddy Chris Paul's has been this season, even though there's the snow and it's a road environment, I think you got to just trot him out and see if he can make it, because he's made from around that distance multiple times this season. I only missed from over 60 against the Chargers, but and obviously the weather is a major factor and probably something that should have been taken a little bit more under consideration. But I didn't have a huge issue there. I think after that, going for it on that 4th down, again, like you said, it's no man's land, but I mean, if you're not going to kick from there, I think I'd probably rather just attempt or just punt him and try to pin him deep. You saw your defense already force 1 3 and outs after you have the field goal. You don't know what your defense is going to do. Then you see your defense force the 3 and out. So I think in that situation, you're like, all right, our defense has some momentum, maybe there. That's where you punt and try to play the field position game. I mean, there's a lot of decisions in this game that I didn't really agree with. I mean, I think Mike Tomlin accepting that penalty to make it 3rd down instead of 4th down was an egregious mistake, and one you can argue really cost them this game. But I think
let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. I think you trust your defense. Like it's in the same vein here of trusting your defense. If you're going to trust your defense to get 1 stop, trust them to get 1 stop. Now it's 3rd down. They get 5 yards in 3rd down. You're in the exact same situation, and your defense has just ran another play and losing some steam, losing some momentum. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, yeah, I get you're in the situation where, you want to make it harder for the field goal kicker. But I mean, Dustin Hopkins hasn't been like anything super special this season. The extra 5 yards isn't going to, I don't think, make a huge difference in that those weather conditions. So I'd rather just play for the 1 stop, 1 play. Your defense is amped up. They just made a huge play. Instead of, deflate. Now you have to get 2 stops. You have to make 2 plays to get a stop. And I just thought that was, just a bad decision making and not something that Tomlin should have done. I thought it was, not a great game out of him overall, but I think the field goal, going back to that, I don't have a huge issue with it. The going forward on the 2nd drive, I have a little bit more of an issue. So I think we're a little flip-flopped in that line of thinking there. But in general, I think, they should have just played for field position more than they did that game and just trusted their defense early to build some momentum. And instead, it was the Cleveland defense that really got the early momentum. They got off the field without long points because Pittsburgh, kicked the field goal and then went for it. And they just built on momentum throughout the first half. And I mean, Myles Garrett, as we talked about, dominating the Browns defense as a whole. Just the Steelers offense couldn't get anything really going. It looked more like the Browns defense of last year than the Browns defense this year. That's been, pretty putrid, and let Daniel Jones beat them earlier this season. Now Daniel Jones is on the street. So just, not really a great game overall from a coaching standpoint and decision-making standpoint.
Yeah, I think, if you're playing safe, if you're playing a conservative approach against a lesser opponent, you're going to win more often than not. when you start to do these aggressive things, you could put the game away early and kind of coast, but it can also backfire, and I think it did backfire here. Hindsight's 2020, but I do think a safer approach would have, probably worked out a little better for the Steelers. Accepting the penalty thing, I do want to circle back to that just for a second. I see both sides of it. You accept that penalty, and then you put them in a obvious passing situation, give TJ Watt and Herbig a chance to pin back their ears. And if you get a sack, then they're not even in field goal range, really. So they're going to have to attempt a long fourth down pass to try and convert there. And so I kind of get where he was coming from. And I think he does have confidence in his defense. He has confidence. He's said it several times. He has confidence in TJ Watt to make those plays in those moments. Obviously, he did not. Yeah, so I get both sides of it. I don't want to paint it as a just plain horrible decision. I don't know what I probably would have declined if I were Tomlin, but I do get where he was coming from there. He obviously, by accepting it, he does risk more time coming off the clock. And then, to me, the absolute worst part of the whole thing is the random timeout that they called after that whole sequence. It's like, why? You had so much time to get a play together and get the right personnel on the field and everything. I don't know what happened there, but wasn't great. Moving on, though, we're going to move on here to the Bengals. Steelers play the Bengals, like I said. The Bengals are kind of trying to cling on to their season. If they lose here, their season, you can pretty much kiss it goodbye. Their season will be essentially lost. They're not mathematically eliminated, but it's going to be very difficult for them to get that 7 seed in the AFC playoffs if they lose. The Steelers are on the road in Cincinnati. There's potential for it to be another snow game. We'll see. I think right now it's freezing on the forecast. No snow yet, but at least going to be a cold weather game. So the Steelers are obviously now used to that from last week. And where do we want to start here? I think I kind of have written about Joey Porter Jr. and Jamar Chase being kind of one of the big matchups to watch. And do you have a matchup that you're looking forward to, or if it's that same one, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
I'm just kind of intrigued to see how the Steelers handle Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. Just after what Garrett did last week, I think you want to keep them upright. Hendrickson's, I think, one of the most underrated pass rushers in the league. Hubbard's a really solid guy. Mike Tomlin had a lot of praise for both of them in his press conference today. So I think just seeing up Broderick Jones and Dan Moore Jr., who has been, pretty solid all year. Garrett kind of got the better of him, but he wasn't completely terrible. And I still have faith that, he's going to continue to be a solid offensive tackle as he has been for, most of the first, 11, 12 games of the season. 11 games of the season, they're 8-3. And Broderick Jones, he's been up and down, but that's really where I'm interested because those are two pretty good edge rushers, and you don't want to let them blow up your game plan. The Steelers have allowed 4 sacks now each of the last 2 weeks. I think that's a number that has to be better. And if it's not better against Cincinnati on the road, it's going to be tough for Pittsburgh to win.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just elaborate a little bit on Joey Porter. I think last year they only faced off one time because I think Chase was out one of those games, and so they only faced off one time, and Porter did a pretty good job. I think he only allowed 2 receptions on 2 targets into his coverage there, and I think he shadowed him on 80-something% of his routes, mostly in man coverage. I think almost half of those were in press man coverage, and so he was able to bully Chase a little bit there as a rookie. But this year is a whole new beast. Chase is on pace to have the best season of his career. He's already basically matched his touchdown total from his best season. I think he only needs one more to tie it, and so he's definitely going to end up beating his touchdown record for himself. The receiving yards, he's number 1 in the NFL by over 100 yards right now. He's having a ridiculous season for a Bengals team that is not doing very well overall. The Bengals are pretty abysmal at running the football, and so they're going to have to pass. I had the stat pulled up here. Let me thumb to it real quick, but the Bengals are the number 6 rushing offense in the league with just 91.5 yards per game. The Steelers are, one of the better rushing defenses. I think they're number 4, allowing 90.3, and so it's going to be a air raid attack by the Bengals. And guys like Chase, guys like Higgins are going to be involved. And so I think if Joey Porter Jr. can it's been an up and down season for him, but if he can figure it out and lock down Chase, then the Steelers have a very, very good chance of winning this game. In terms of injuries for this game, Alex Highsmith may be back. We'll see. I think today he more or less said he confirmed it was a low ankle injury, which is obviously better than a high ankle, which keeps you out for a month or more often than not. This is a low ankle. He's been out for a couple weeks now, so I think he has a solid chance. He told the media he's going to kind of work this week and see how it feels, and they'll make a decision on his status for the game later. Mike Tomlin kind of confirmed that. He said he's leaning into working his way back to be available for them. And then two guys off IR. Corey Trice Jr., whose 21-day practice window has been open for, I think, the Thursday before the Baltimore Ravens game. So I think he's coming up on 2 weeks of that window. So he's got, a little over a week for them to make a decision. He was a full participant all of last week. Kind of a surprise that he wasn't activated, to be honest. And so I think he's more than likely to end up getting activated here in the next couple of days. Montravius Adams is an interesting one. We haven't heard of him in a while. Well, he had a knee injury a while back. He's been on IR. His practice window has not been open, so that's something we can look to happen this week. He's a solid rotational player. He made a couple of plays there in the middle. It's good to have a bigger body guy. I don't know how much of a use he'll be this week against the Bengals, again, since they don't rush the ball very much, but definitely good to have D-line depth regardless. Is that everybody, Joe, in terms of the injuries, I think?
Yeah, no, I think that was pretty much.
Yeah, we haven't seen the first injury report, obviously, because tomorrow, Wednesday, will be the first report. But I think that wraps up all of our topics for today. We do have a quick fan question I wanted to hit. This one is from a new caller, I believe, Levi in Arizona. Thank you, Levi, for calling. And if you guys want to have your question answered on the future episode, call that number at the bottom of the screen, 412-254-3145. Again, that's 412-254-3145. You can also text that number if you're a little shy and don't want your voice on the show. That's fine. Just give us a text. Tell us your name, and we'll read off your question live on air next episode. This is from Levi.
Hey, guys. Big fan of the show. My name's Levi from Arizona. Just a quick question here, and it's kind of been bothering me for some time now. But it seems like our team is built on the foundation of just, go out and beat that guy across the line from you, whether it's receivers and wide or quarterbacks or defensive linemen and offensive linemen. Is that just go? And it shows the lineage of Mike Tomlin's tree. I know we're all in panic mode as fans, Steelers fans, but I don't know why, but it just seems like they don't do. You guys talk about X's and O's and strategy and all this type of stuff, but when it comes down to it, it seems like the Steelers. That's why they struggle in the red zone. That's why they struggle on short down yardage. There's no plays, and it seems like everyone else has plays that are drawn up and are schemed around getting that yardage or getting that first down, and it seems like we're just a bunch of boneheads out there hey, we beat our guy, we're successful. If we don't, we lose. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but maybe you guys can elaborate on it. It just seems so frustrating as a fan to watch all these routes and things that take place for other things, like tight ends being wide open, and we have to fight and claw and maul for every yard we could possibly get as an offense. It's been that way for years and years and years. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, it's a good question, Levi. I appreciate that. Very good question. So the Steelers, they can't seem to get easy wins, and I think there's no place more apparent than in the red zone, as you suggested. I do want to say, getting tight ends free and open and stuff like that, they had a good one there against the Commanders with Freiermuth out in the flat. There are some things where they scheme these guys open, but it seems difficult, and it seems like more often than not, they're just looking for guys like George Pickens to win on a, end zone, a goal line fade or whatever, and just kind of be better than the guy across from him. And, Joe, do you have any thoughts here in terms of, are the Steelers making this too hard on themselves? Are they over-reliant on kind of winning the one-on-one matchups?
Yeah, just going back to, the Browns game, most recent game we've seen, I think the weather conditions played a big part in that, because if you go back and watch the tape, there were guys that they schemed open, they had open, just couldn't get the ball to him for one reason or another, didn't see him, or the weather played a factor. So I do think they have, or their Smith has done a better job than I think maybe he got credit for against Cleveland for scheming guys open. But in general, I do agree there are times where they maybe have one set outcome and they're overly reliant on that one set outcome, and don't really run enough, options off maybe a deep ball to Pickens or something like that to open up the offense and scheme something if that's not there. So I do think they can do a better job of it. I don't think it's as bad as it maybe looked, especially if you just look at the game on Thursday. But I think there's definitely room for improvement for sure in terms of using scheme to win.
Yeah, and I can assure you, Levi, they are absolutely X's and O's going on in that room. I mean, people like to talk about Mike Tomlin's not a X's and O's coach. He's just a motivator. I mean, that's not true at all. From everything we've ever heard from players that have played with him, he's in those meetings. He's, talking X's and O's with the guys. I mean, they are very, very, very involved. I know it's frustrating when the results aren't happening. It's easy to be like, the coaches aren't, doing their jobs. But, the other people are doing jobs too. You always have to keep that in mind. The other teams are going to be, scheming off of the Steelers. So maybe that's something. Maybe they're not doing enough self-scouting. Whatever it might be, I think it's tough to pin down. I think it's probably tough for them to pin down, or they would have better results, especially in the red zone. It's one of the big questions. If the Steelers can figure out the red zone issue, then they are a team that can compete all the way to the Super Bowl. If they can't, they are a team that will probably lose in the first round of the playoffs once again. So that's going to be the biggest focus over the next month and a half, plus figuring out what is going wrong in the red zone. How can they incorporate Justin Fields intelligently and actually have a plan? I think it was kind of odd to hear Russell Wilson say he has no idea when Fields is coming in. There should be a plan. Everybody should know these situations Fields is coming in. And that can change from week to week, so it's not so obvious for the other team to know such a thing, but everybody needs to be in the know, and I think this all kind of feeds in. They're maybe trying to do too much right now in terms of working Fields in, and I think it's just going to be a process of kind of ironing all these kinks out. And unfortunately, we're here in almost December. It's not a good time to be ironing kinks out, so I understand the frustration, Levi. And great question. I hope you definitely give us a call back and ask some more questions down the line. And happy Thanksgiving to you. Joe, happy Thanksgiving to you. What are you doing? Do you have plans of eating with the family in Boston?
Yeah, no, we're going to go to my aunt lives a few towns over, so we're going to head to her place. Should be a good time. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
All right. Well, that is everything for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we will catch you guys next week.